Hello again. This is one of over 250 talks on the history of Western art, and I've arranged them chronologically. I start with cave art and work through to the present day. This is section 27 on Impressionism, and this is the fifth talk on Camille Pissarro, known as the father of Impressionism. This is a self-portrait he painted the year he died in 1903, when he was 73. He was born on July the 10th, 1830, on the island of St. Thomas in what was then the Dutch West Indies. It's now a US territory. He was named Jacob Abraham Camille Pissarro. He was raised in a Jewish family, but the family was marginalised by the local community because his parents had what was regarded as an unconventional or unacceptable marriage. His father married his widowed aunt, and although they weren't related by blood, it was forbidden by Jewish law, and so as a consequence their 4 children were barred from the local Jewish school, and they had to attend an all-black primary school. Camille spent his childhood on the island until he was 12. He was then sent to boarding school in France, where he developed an early interest in French art. He went back to St. Thomas, worked in his father's trading business, but was drawn increasingly to art, and this feeling was encouraged and inspired by his friend and mentor Fritz Melby. This self-portrait was painted in his Paris apartment in the Place du Dauphin, which overlooks the Pont Neuf. It was painted with then dabbing brushstrokes, typical of his later work. He was a modest, self-critical man. He held strong artistic and political beliefs, and he influenced many younger artists. And I think you can get a sense of his air of personal authority in this portrait. He was poor most of his life, although towards the end of his life he did begin to enjoy financial security and in fact receive official recognition. The year he died in 1903, 2 of his paintings were bought by the Louvre. But going back to St. Thomas, this is a remarkable early work in his career. It was created soon after he left St. Thomas for France, and it belongs to a period when he was still under the influence of the Caribbean environment. It depicts 2 Afro-Caribbean women engaged in conversation on a sunlit path beside the sea. One's carrying laundry, the other's carrying a basket. It's an everyday moment rendered with dignity and subtle realism. The figures stand out prominently against the tropical landscape, bathed in warm West Indian sunlight, long shadows cast on the ground. And it shows, I think, this early work, Pissarro's lifelong empathy for working people, which became a central theme through his career. Even at this stage, he was more interested in portraying the life of ordinary individuals than idealised or classical subjects. It's also it was also a period when you can just see it at the bottom left. He was still using his Sephardic spelling of his surname, Pissarro, with a Z, before he later adopted the double S spelling. Now, St. Thomas played a formative role in his artistic development. He was, through his father's import-export business, exposed to all sectors of local society. By 1856, when he painted this, he wasn't married or started his own family, but it was an important time of his life because he decided to become a full-time artist and to distance himself from the family business. So it's this point in his life is both a personal and artistic transition. He's moving away from his Caribbean origins, his roots, and moving towards universal themes of rural life. Like this, donkey in front of a farm, Montmorency. In 1852, he went to Venezuela with the Dutch artist Frits Melby, and they worked together in a studio. In 1855, so 3 years later, he moved to Paris and was exposed to artists like Ingres, Delacroix, Corot. He had some informal mentoring actually by Corot, which has shaped his emerging style. Through the 1860s, he painted outdoors, natural scenes, rural scenes, and he was also registered as a copyist at the Louvre. This is an important early work. You'll notice he's still spelling his name with a Z. It was created during the time he was living in Montmorency, which is a small village near Paris. It shows his dedication to capturing rural landscapes, simple, everyday scenes, and this would be a central theme of his career. Montmorency was significant. It was part of the Barbizon-influenced countryside, heavily inspired by Corot and the Barbizon school artists. Around this year, 1859, he was experimenting, as you can see, with loose brushwork, focusing on natural light, and this was setting the foundation for his later hallmark style. He was observing, recording, changing seasons, light, rural labour, all authentic subject matter. It differentiated him from many of his contemporaries. And it was in the early 1860s that he began his relationship with Julie Velay, who was his mother's maid. Her father was a vineyard worker, and they lived together. They weren't married until 1871. His family life in the French countryside added another layer of personal significance, I think, to these scenes. He wasn't initially successful in the Paris Salon. He was rejected because of his unconventional approach. Simplistically, donkeys were not an acceptable subject for the Salon. And this pushed him towards alternative exhibition venues and eventually led to his critical role in founding Impressionism. So this represents his artistic roots, his developing technical style, and the beginning of his rebellious independent path. This is the Hermitage at Pontoise. We see a cluster of houses, a winding path through the village of Pontoise, and Pissarro lived there between 1866 and 1882. His approach here to this painting is remarkably modern in a way. Note his relaxed brushwork, naturalistic colours, fidelity to the changing effects of light. All these things would become core Impressionist principles. There's no historical or sentimental overtones. He's showing ordinary villagers and their environment. He believed in the dignity and value of peasant life. It's a large painting and one of his early masterpieces. You can see, I think, in this the influence of the Barbizon school, Gustave Courbet, and possibly Edouard Manet, but Pissarro has put his own stamp upon the landscape. It's not yet impressionistic. It's more realistic, but it was shortly after this that he abandoned the realist style for a looser brushwork and atmospheric effects, for which is, of course, well known, the true trademarks of Impressionism. He's inviting us, I think, to step into the tranquil countryside where he lived and experience it firsthand. He was already fiercely independent by the 1860s. He distanced himself from the academic system. He found inspiration in direct observation, community, egalitarian ideals. So it represents not only his artistic evolution, but a manifesto for the embracing of everyday life and landscape. Now, Pissarro was Danish, and so he couldn't join the French army at the start of the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71. He left France with other artists like Claude Monet and Charles-François d'Aubigny, and he settled in Norwood, which is in South London. It was then a village on the edge of London. It's now, of course, part of London. The road you see here has been straightened and it's now lined on both sides with suburban houses. But then it was almost a country village. There was also a commercial reason for going. What became the Impressionists found it hard to sell their paintings in France, and they thought they might be able to sell them to wealthy English industrialists who were building large art collections. And the dealer, Paul Durand Ruel, believed the same thing. And he held 10 exhibitions of Impressionist work in his gallery in New Bond Street between 1870 and 74, called the Society of French Artists. This was before the first Impressionist exhibition in Paris. But Durand Ruel found it difficult to sell their work. He found it difficult to deal with them even, not to put too fine a point on it. Claude Monet was an atheist Republican. Pissarro was a Jewish anarchist. Edgar Degas, a bad-tempered anti-Semite. And Pierre-Auguste Renoir was a reactionary misogynist. Now, Durand Ruel had a hard time. His wife died. He never remarried, so he had to bring up his 5 children on his own. He came close to bankruptcy while supporting the Impressionists through thick and thin. He completely believed in what they were doing. He believed there was a market, but it was very slow to materialise despite his promoting the market. The artist returned to France after the war, but he continued to show French art in his gallery in London. And it was a favourite meeting place for young British artists like George Clausen. In the end, he and the Impressionists were saved not by English buyers, but by American buyers. In fact, Durand Ruel said, "Without America, I would have been lost, ruined." So, Pissarro came to London in late 1870 and settled, as I said, in Lower Norwood. And this profoundly influenced his art. He was inspired by the misty suburban landscape and painted around a dozen canvases around Norwood, Sydenham and the Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace itself had a dramatic history. It was originally constructed in Hyde Park between 1850 and 51 for the Great Exhibition. It was designed by Joseph Paxton, celebrated for its revolutionary use of glass and iron. And then in 1852 to 54, it was dismantled and expanded and rebuilt in Sydenham, South London, what's called Crystal Palace. And it became a beacon of Victorian ingenuity. It hosted exhibitions and concerts. It even had a pioneering public dinosaur sculptures placed in the park around it. The palace we see here was tragically burnt down in 1936, but the legacy endures. There's still a Crystal Palace Park and museum. This painting is actually quite striking. He's pushed the Crystal Palace, tucked it, if you like, into the left margin, and he's showing the newly built suburban villas and the bustle of modern British middle-class life. It shows his interest in ordinary existence and atmospheric effects rather than grand spectacle. While he was there in London, he befriended Monet, who also moved to London at that time, and it enabled him to study Turner and Constable. And he began working, as I said, with Paul Joanne Ruel. In 1871, he married Julie Vellet, who he'd been living with. He married in Croydon, which is in South London, in fact, the town where I got married. They had 8 children. Lucien Pissarro, born in 1863, and Jean Raquel in 1865. Now, she died when she was just 9. Then was followed by Georges-Henri, Félix, Ludovic Rodot, and Jean Bonin, and Paul Émile, of whom 6 became painters. This is a portrait of Jean Pissarro called Minette, with a bouquet. Now, when he returned to France in 1872, he found his house was destroyed, and he'd left behind 1,500 paintings that he'd completed over the past 20 years, and only 40 remained. The rest had been completely destroyed by soldiers. Some of them were even used as doormats. And it's possible, I think, that those early paintings, if we had 1,500 early paintings, would have shown him as the inventor of the Impressionist style. But I think it's now Monet who's seen more to be to have that role. There was another greater sadness in his life. This is Minette, his first and much beloved daughter, born, as I said, in 1865, so she's about 7 in this painting. And tragically, 2 years later, in 1874, she died aged just 9. But he managed to re-establish his life in Paris. He renewed old friendships. He was close friends with Cézanne, with Monet, Manet, Renoir, Degas. And with Pissarro's lead, they created an alternative to the salon so they could display their own works and their own unique style. This is Hoarfrost, Old Road to Ennery. It's a quintessential example of early Impressionism, a testament to his lifelong preoccupation with rural life and changing seasons. It was when he lived in Pontoise. You see the gently undulating country road. You can see the morning frost. It's a tranquil scene, a crisp winter's day, the pale refracted light, the subtle purples and blues of the shadows, the soft earthy reds of the freshly turned soil. I think its importance lies in its technical innovation as well as its subject matter. Note the broken brushstrokes, the nuanced palette, capturing transient atmospheric effects, all hallmarks of the Impressionist movement. He is focused not on dramatic historic events, but on the everyday, a humble country lane, a single peasant figure moving slowly, blending into the landscape. Now, it was in 1873 that he and his friends established a collective called the Société Anonyme des Artistes Peintres, Sculpteurs et Graveurs, the Anonymous Society of Artists, Painters, Sculptors and Engravers. There were 15 artists in the group, and Pissarro created the first charter, became the key figure in establishing and holding the group together over many years. This painting was probably painted in the months leading up to their first exhibition of 1874, in which he played a leading role. Excuse me. Sorry, I've got a bit of a sore throat at the moment. This exhibition, and I quote, shocked and horrified the critics. The critics were looking for paintings that portrayed religious or historic or mythological settings, and they found the subjects that were exhibited vulgar and commonplace. There were scenes of street life, people going about their everyday lives, rural life, and also they thought the manner of painting, as you can see here, they believed it was too sketchy, too incomplete. They expected the artist to spend time making the brushwork invisible. And in fact, they thought it was an insult to the craft of traditional artists who would spend weeks or months on their work, producing the finish that the critics were expecting. And the term Impressionism was coined by one of the critics, Louis Leroy, as an insult in a satirical review he wrote. And although intended as an insult, it was thought appropriate and it was adopted by the group. And 2 years later, their second exhibition was called the Second Impressionist Exhibition and was held in a gallery of Paul Johan Ruel. This is the Côte de Boeuf at l'Hermitage, and it's a landmark of his mature period. It's painted on a hillside near his home outside Pontoise, and it signals a shift. He's moving from fleeting atmospheric effects towards, as you can see here, a more structured, a more densely worked composition. His layered vertical and horizontal lines. The wooded vista is rendered with thick, deliberate brushstrokes. He's created a sort of tapestry-like surface. The trees form a sort of rhythm, an intricate rhythm. Small figures and houses almost hidden are discovered if we look carefully at the painting. I'll let you try and find the two small figures in the painting. It's an ordinary rural hillside, modest homes, embodying his democratic vision and respect for peasant life. It's unusually large for Pissarro, and he described the effort it needed as the work of a Benedictine. It was exhibited at the third Impressionist exhibition of 1877, and it was immediately recognised by critics and peers as a masterpiece, and it later inspired contemporaries who painted in the same region. He used ultramarine blue, vermilion, viridian, emerald green to apply vivid accents to the subdued tonal background, and it stands, I think, as a bridge between Impressionism and Post-Impressionism, foreshadowing Cézanne's structural innovations. And I thought I would show here a work painted the same year by Cézanne. They worked closely together. Pissarro was living with his wife Julie and his children at Pontoise and collaborated with Cézanne. One of the most important, I think, artistic exchanges of the French Impressionist movement. Incidentally, the Côte Saint-Denis and the Côte de Boeuf are both the same hill near Pontoise. You can see their different approaches. You can see the similarity between them, and they're painting. I think it's probably in a slightly different location, but they're painting a very similar scenes in locations that are close to each other. And I think these two pictures together, you can see or should see as a foundation for modern painting, bridging the transition from Impressionism to post-Impressionism and even early modern abstraction. Another painting, The Red Roofs, Corner of Village, Winter, was painted in the same area, the Côte Saint-Denis near Pontoise. You can see a small cluster of houses with vivid orange roofs, and interestingly, he has placed them behind this dense network of bare winter trees. I think this reflects his commitment, well, both to rural and semi-urban life, but also to creating a sort of a novel approach, a structured approach to the representation of the French countryside. It's not picturesque or staged, it's lived in. It's subtly complex. He's intentionally blocked the view with these twisting tree trunks and branches, and so he's turned the space between us and the houses into this vibrant interplay of line and colour. And this shifts attention from storytelling to the formal qualities of the paint. We see here planes, abstract planes, intense impasto, capturing the effects of winter light and movement by this creation of this mosaic of intertwining parallel planes of paint. The brushstroke, the thick energetic stroke, I think infuses it with feeling, dynamism, and highlights the play of colour in the roofs, the fields, the distant slopes. He painted this during a productive collaboration with Paul Cézanne, as I said, who painted similar motifs. And this was exhibited at the third Impressionist exhibition of 1877, and it received praise for its strong, simple touch and poetic quietness. I think it shows his ability to blend structure and spontaneity, blending or balancing detailed observation of nature with expressive handling of paint, a powerful tribute to the Impressionist vision of everyday life. A different sort of painting here, a portrait, a young peasant having her coffee. Pissarro remained committed to the Impressionist movement's social themes, the dignity and quiet heroism of peasant life in the French countryside. What we see here is a young woman, probably a local farm worker, absorbed in the simple act of drinking coffee. If you look at his brushwork, we see small adjacent strokes, dabs of thick paint, which together integrate the figure and her humble setting, evoking the rough texture of her wool clothing, the muted light filtering through the farmhouse window. It's sincere, it's unposed, it shows his practice of finishing preparatory figure drawings before working directly on the painted canvas. We still have a number of sketches of this painting. It gives the figure, I think, a natural solidity and stillness, an authenticity, the thoughtful contemplation of the subject. It's earthy, restrained, and I think underscores the ordinariness rudeness of rural labour, but also its dignity. It was exhibited at the 7th Impressionist exhibition of 1882, along with other portrayals of peasant girls. And it shows, I think, his egalitarian ideals, his technical evolution towards a more structured, pointillistic inspired brushwork. He in that is anticipating his later interest in neo-impressionism. His approach, which we could describe as monumental, is unusual for such a humble subject. He's asserting the worth of ordinary existence and elevating it to the status of high art. It was inspired by his political beliefs. He subscribed to the radical anarchist publication Le Révolté, and he was in communication with leading anarchists like the theorizer Jean Grave, as well as fellow anarchist artists like Paul Signac. His views included a belief in individual freedom, rejection of authority, and a rejection of capitalist inequalities, but he rejected violence like Pierre Proudhon, but unlike Peter Kropotkin, who saw it as inevitable. So Pissarro was a peaceful, shall we say, or anti-violent anarchist. Apple picking, Iranie, set in the orchard below his beloved home in Iranie-sur-Epte, and the painting shows 3 figures, 2 women bending to gather fallen apples, one reaching up into the tree. It's immersed in a harmony of natural forms. It's a glowing autumnal light. It's not a sweet sentimental scene. It's rigorously composed. The crooked apple tree and its shadow anchor the design, and the figures' gestures animate the painting. In 1884, for a short while, he taught Vincent van Gogh, an artist who was then 23 years younger than him, who had impressed Pissarro. Then in 1885, the year before this was painted, he met Georges Seurat and Paul Signac, and they had a more, what should we call it, scientific approach to painting and colour theory, known as neo-impressionism. And for the next 3 or 4 years, Pissarro himself adopted the painting technique known as divisionism or pointillism. And it consisted in putting on small dots of colour, often primary colours, to create the impression that was required in the painting as seen from a distance. And this painting marks his brief embrace of neo-impressionism. We see lively multicoloured dots, a dappled effect. It was inspired, as I said, by Seurat and Signac. He experimented with breaking light and form into parts, letting the viewer's eye blend these back into a coherent, vibrant, tactile surface of shimmering colour. There were 3 major apple harvest paintings that he painted, reflecting his fascination with agricultural rhythm, and this painting was exhibited at the final 8th Impressionist exhibition of 1886. By this stage, the Impressionists were no longer a sort of single group. They'd fragmented for various reasons. One was that the neo-impressionists, Seurat, Signac, and at this stage Pissarro formed a sort of subgroup. Some of the artists were working with dealers at this stage to exhibit their works, and so didn't need to exhibit at the Impressionist exhibition. The critics, incidentally, of the 8th exhibition were impressed by Pissarro's ability to reinvent himself and take on new challenges. He became the only artist who went from Impressionism to post-Impressionism. Monet, Renoir, Sisley did not exhibit. Pissarro did. In fact, Pissarro was the only artist who exhibited at every one of the 8 exhibitions over the 12-year period they were held. Although it needs to be said that Paul Degas and Berthe Morisot exhibited at 7 of the exhibitions. There were, just to put it in perspective, there were 56 artists who exhibited across the 8 exhibitions, although about half of those only exhibited once. And the other thing was that Pissarro, who was the sort of guiding light and father figure that held it all together, about 10% of all the works exhibited were by Pissarro. Now in 1890, Pissarro returned to London, mainly to see his son Georges and his other son Lucien, who had settled in London the same year. And this is one of the paintings he made of central London. He painted a number of pictures of the bridges. He came back again in 1892 when Lucien married. And then he painted in Kew Gardens and Kew Green. And he came back again in 1897 when Lucien was ill. And he's still painting here in this pointillism technique. But after about 4 years, about this time, he rejected pointillism. I'll show you one more painting in the same style because he didn't feel it suited his natural style, and he returned to his earlier style, but with a firmer hand and more subtle colours. So this work, Charing Cross Bridge, London, and the work I'm just about to show is one of his last pointillist paintings. This is the other work using these dabs of paint, Woman with a Green Headscarf of 1893, portraying rural women in their everyday environment, painted with these short, vibrant, pointillist-inspired brushstrokes. The woman is bathed in a shimmering light. The boundaries are blurred between figure and background, and he's adapted the pointillist technique and infused the rigid scientific approach with his own warmth and humanity. She's shown here with lively dabs of yellow and blue. It's slightly distant expression of the woman hints at both her strength and reserve, her modest setting. There's a rustic chair, a woven basket, grounding, I think, the painting in the everyday reality of peasant life. For him, these subjects weren't decorative, they were documentary. He was recording with empathy the dignity of rural working women, reflecting the social and agricultural rhythms where he lived with his family. By 1893, he was a respected elder amongst the Impressionists, but he still retained his egalitarian conviction that the lives of ordinary people deserved monumental treatment. He was known in the village where he lived as a kindly figure, familiar to the villagers, often seen sketching outdoors, ever attentive to the nuances of light and colour. And this is a testament, this picture, a testament to his mature style, a synthesis of modern techniques, social consciousness and deep affection for the humble lives he observed there. I thought I'd show you this picture. He painted, it's a rare engagement with the nude. There were a series of peasant women bathing paintings, especially from 1894 onward. This is Peasant Woman Standing Naked. Anecdotally, the series may have been prompted by prolonged, very bad weather in his village, which forced him to work indoors. So he shifted his focus from landscape to figure drawing. And these nudes he described as romantic prints and drawings, many bathers in all sorts of poses in landscapes of paradise, reflecting his democratic approach, highlighting peasant women in intimate everyday moments. He did actually find it difficult to find models willing to pose because the rural community was extremely modest. And also his wife, Julie, is said to have disapproved of him using nude models. And there were practical constraints, including financial and, as I said, the local customs. He didn't paint many of these paintings. It was only around 1894 he produced several variations over the next couple of years, but that was the end of this subject matter. But this is one of 14 views of the Boulevard Montmartre that he painted in 1897. He painted the boulevard in snow, rain, fog, mist and sunlight. He painted it in the morning, afternoon, at sunset, and in this one painting at night. It's the only example we have of a night painting by Pissarro. He's contrasting the cool white glow of the newly installed electric street lamps with the warm yellow of gas lights and the oil lamps on horse-drawn cabs. The electric lights were unusual, still regarded as works of wonder. They were first installed some years before in Paris and the same year in London, 1878. But they didn't extend out to the Boulevard Montmartre until the mid-1890s. You can see in this painting he's employed loose gestural brushstrokes, a hallmark of Impressionism. He's used a patchwork of dashes and daubs. He's used them to invoke the vibrancy and motion of the city's crowds and the shimmering lights. And the effect overall is almost abstract. He's captured the ephemeral qualities of light and atmosphere in urban life and captured the fast-changing modern world through this painterly technique. Now, by the 1890s, his eyesight was failing. He adapted his methods. He continued painting vibrant scenes until his death in 1903. This is Rue Saint-Honoré, afternoon rain effect, showing a rainy day on a bustling Parisian street. And it's part of a series of urban views he created from a window in the Hôtel de Louvre, where he captured the effects of light and weather on the city. It's now in the Thyssen-Bornemisza in Madrid. And the vibrant brushwork, I think, captures the wet streets, the energy of the city, the dynamic atmosphere. It's one of about 15 paintings that use this technique, thick impasto complementary colours mixed directly on the canvas, a loose, dynamic series of brushstrokes to convey a sense of movement and light. We're getting towards the end of his career, and towards the end of his career there was a return to Impressionism after experimenting with pointillism. And this is a good example of his late work, demonstrating, I think, his lifelong dedication to capturing the fleeting effects of light and atmosphere. Painted in Éragny-sur-Epte, the village in Normandy where he settled from the mid-1880s until his death. We see a peasant woman resting on a grassy knoll, dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. It's intimate, it's natural, it reflects his egalitarian outlook, his belief that all humans are of equal worth and should have equal rights and opportunities. He gives dignity and centrality to working class subjects and provides us with a window onto the rhythms of rural life. The paintwork is loose, shimmering, quick, vibrant brushstrokes, evoking the sensation of early morning light as the light touches foliage, clothing and the earth. The optical sensitivity is characteristic of his mature style, but the measured, almost contemplative atmosphere hints at his interest in neo-impressionism. These late works focus on light-filled landscapes, quiet moments of labour. By this time, the very late 19th century, beginnings of the 20th century, he'd become a highly respected elder of the Impressionists, surrounded by his family, becoming much more financially stable. He'd long since settled in this village, and it continued to provide inspiration. He wandered around the village sketching every day, tramping the fields from early morning onwards, catching the changing effects of sunlight and season, and his unwavering belief in the representation of ordinary moments of people's lives. This is a masterwork that condenses his visual philosophy, democracy, light and nature entwined in harmony. This is the last picture I'll show you, painted the year he died, 1903. It shows a view of the Seine and the Louvre in Paris, capturing the fleeting effects of light and atmosphere using loose brushwork. It's part of a series of Parisian cityscapes that he painted from a high vantage point. It was the second floor of a house at Place Dauphine, and he shifted in the last year to these from rural scenes to these urban views, these city views. We see a panoramic scene represented geometrically, softened by winter mist, loose brushwork, a harmonious palette of cool earth tones, touches of watery light, a subtle poetic impression of a cold Parisian day. Trees line the embankment, figures stroll along the riverside, barges glide along the waterway, giving a sense of everyday life in turn-of-the-century Paris. In the distance, we see the grand architecture of the Louvre emerging through the haze of the distance. He created nearly 30 views from this same window, each with distinct light and weather effects, epitomising his quest to capture atmosphere and movement. He died on the 13th of November 1903 at the age of 73. We think it was sepsis or blood poisoning brought about by an abscess in his prostate. But he had been through a period of declining health, and his eyesight was getting worse, and he had a recurring eye infection, and when he died he had a bad cold. Part of the problem was that he believed in homeopathic medicine, and that led to a delay in the necessary surgery, which ultimately proved fatal, led to his death. He was buried alongside his parents at Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, one of the city's most renowned resting places for notable cultural figures. We don't have a lot of details of his funeral. He was by this time recognised as a central figure in French art. He was admired by peers and younger artists. He was known for his generosity, his mentoring of young artists. He was known as Father Pissarro, widely acknowledged amongst Impressionists and Neo-Impressionists. His son Lucien played an important role in preserving and extending his legacy. Now, Lucien was himself already recognised as a distinguished artist and printmaker, working in London, deeply influenced by the Impressionists, later contributed to the arts and crafts movement. He forged his own path, but at the same time helped to promote his father's work and memory through exhibitions and publications. He organised retrospectives of his father's work. He offered first-hand insights into his father's working methods and artistic ethos. He didn't, however, lead or form any sort of atelier or school teaching the style, but he was instrumental in ensuring his father's posthumous reputation remained strong. So his enduring legacy is profound. He was, as I said, the only artist to exhibit at all 8 Impressionist exhibitions. He played a crucial role in advising and befriending a lot of the major artists of the period: Cézanne, Gauguin, Van Gogh. He championed a new artistic style. He advised young painters. He helped shape the trajectory from Impressionism to post-Impressionism. He earned Van Gogh's and Cézanne's praise as a teacher and visionary. Today he's recognised as not only for his technical innovation and the beauty of his work, but as embodying democratic and humane ideals at the heart of modern art. That brings me to the end of my talk today. Thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to recording the next talk. Thank you. Goodbye for now.